With Christopher Nolan's new, historically, fictionally accurate version of the Odyssey coming, I've been doing my best to relearn the basics of Homer's two epics. Now, I haven't read these, or the Spark Notes, since I was in high school. But being the Christopher Nolan fanboy that I am, I wanted to get more in tune with this subject matter. So to prepare for the Odyssey, I of course played Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which has to be the most accurate version of these stories depicted. No, I didn't do that. But I did learn more about the Iliad and the Odyssey, the story of the Trojan War, and of course the movie Troy. Now, I had never watched this movie. I was not all that excited to. I know that the actors in recent years have talked about how they didn't particularly enjoy being part of that project. It doesn't have the highest of ratings. It's a pretty long movie, especially the director's cut, but I wanted to watch it to prepare for the Odyssey. And here we are. So, who was gonna tell me that this movie is badass? Why did this movie fly under my radar for so long? And why is it as lowly rated as it is? Well, I'll get to that one. Perhaps the most fascinating part about this movie is that at one point, Christopher Nolan was going to direct it. And it actually does kind of feel like a Christopher Nolan movie. No, there's nothing to do with time, but it is a pretty grounded and realistic version of the story, something that I feel like Christopher Nolan would tell, and something that it seems the Odyssey is going against. Which is funny. I feel like if the Iliad and the Odyssey came out today, which, just bear with me on that one. If they came out today, I feel like people would see the Odyssey as a huge departure from the Iliad. We're doing a sequel about some side character from the Iliad. There's giants, cyclops, sirens, sea monsters, a helmet with a golden spine down the back of it. We have really lost the plot here. But with Nolan almost directing Troy, and now with him directing the Odyssey, my question is, can you watch both of them back to back, Troy as the Iliad and the Odyssey as the Odyssey, as a sort of part one, part two duology? There are a lot of shared characters, but will it make sense, or will they be more similar than we think? So in this video, I'm going to be going over my general thoughts on the movie Troy, some of the differences it has from the Iliad, and overall, if I think that these movies would work as a duology. So grab your sword and sandals, hop into this strange wooden horse, and take over the city as we discuss the movie Troy. So I'm going to go over this movie as a movie first. I'm not going to compare it to the Iliad yet, just the strengths and weaknesses that this movie has. And to start off, we get some voiceover from Sean Bean, who plays Odysseus in this movie. Yes, the same Odysseus that Matt Damon is playing in the Odyssey. So if you were a total novice to this story, you'd probably think he was the main character, or a very important character, potentially even in a sequel. But very quickly, this movie identifies itself as an early 2000s movie. There's some opening text to try and catch you up to speed, but then in the opening scene, they kinda rehash what was just said, more specifically, the rift between Achilles and Agamemnon. Some of the tropes worked into this movie are very familiar and very synonymous with early 2000s fantasy, like how Brad Pitt's Achilles is your pretty typical fantasy hero. He's an excellent fighter, womanizer, he was played by Brad Pitt in the 2000s, that should really tell you everything you need to know. But he's also the one who wants to stop fighting. He rejects the call to adventure, but he's in for one last mission before he retires. But also, being reminiscent of early 2000s movies isn't always a bad thing either. The costumes, set design, even the CGI looks incredible. This was shot on location, not in a studio, and that definitely shows. Even the direction and cinematography seem a step above what was normal at the time. The dialogue, sure, it can be cheesy at times, but you won't find anything like this.
My dad is coming home.
There's a great line that Hector says to Paris about how the sea can be great in the morning, but killer in the afternoon. Later on, Agamemnon says that the beach was Troy's in the morning, but the Achaeans in the afternoon. There's a lot of different parallels like this throughout the movie as it continues to show us both sides. And therein lies a big strength of this movie, how it shows us both sides of this conflict. We see Paris, and his love for Helen, which kicks off a war that will surely last years. Actually, only days in the movie though. But we also see Achilles join Odysseus in this war. Achilles, who openly retaliates and says his hatred for Agamemnon. The story gives us ample opportunity and reason to like both sides of people in this war and root for both of them in different ways. While Achilles is the central character, I almost think that we're rooting for the people in Troy most of all. They have a good king, we see that Helen and Paris are in love, and her husband Menelaus wasn't a great husband, and above all else, we see that Hector is willing to do everything he can for his brother, including starting the battle. This is a great central heart of the story, brotherhood and love. Something that carries through the first act of the story and something that the Achaean side attempts to replicate in the second act. Early on, we meet Achilles' cousin Patroclus, who himself isn't nearly as great of a warrior, though in a time of need, he dons the armor to inspire hope in the army, only to be killed himself. This marks a huge turning point in both Achilles and the war in general, showing us that Achilles wasn't able to save his cousin, while Hector was able to save his brother, something that even shines through to Hector as he goes to meet Achilles in combat. This works as a through line, the brotherhood these sides share, whether they are family or not. Or I guess in this story, if they're brothers or just cousins. And this works, but this movie gives us another emotional through line, and that's love. Of course, there's Paris and his love for Helen, but there's also Hector, who reunites with his wife and child back in the city of Troy, showing some of the more brutal aspects and consequences of war. Women, children, brothers, sons, cousins, all of them are casualties in this conflict, even if they aren't the ones at the other end of a sword. This is highlighted by King Priam's conversation with Achilles, when he asks him how many different family members he's cut down over the years, something that tears at Achilles' heel. Alright, that was bad. But of course, Brad Pitt is in the movie, he's the hero, so we gotta give him a reciprocated love interest, and that's Briseis, played by Rose Byrne. This whole plotline, while it is in the Iliad, feels the most underbaked in this movie. I guess this is one of the cons of condensing a 10-year war into about 10 days. But speaking about the war, the fight sequences in this movie are awesome. They are a bit Hollywood, even coming from somebody who doesn't particularly care about historical or realistic choreography, but they're well shot, they're brutal, and entertaining. It feels like there's always something going on, and when there's not, it's a welcome change. The pacing of these battles and these smaller, intimate moments is incredible. There's a great sense of scale when it comes to these battles portrayed on screen, and while a common complaint of this movie is that it shortens the Trojan War, I actually think it does make for a more compelling movie. Having these moments all span across just a few hours or days on screen makes the story far more intimate and like anything could happen at any moment. There's a back and forth to these battles that makes sense for a more condensed version of this war. While the Greeks take the upper hand quickly, the city of Troy and its soldiers prove hard to break, forcing them to retreat to the beaches where they have their own tactics to show. And that's one of the cooler parts of this movie, the battle tactics. To see Achilles and Odysseus talk about them during the siege and how things are going wrong, and then the archers switching spots so there's always arrows flying is great. The flaming balls rolling down the hill is ingenious and makes for a great sequence. Maybe the Battle of Winterfell should have taken its battle tactics from this movie and not the Battle of Helm's Deep, which is actually a crazy thing to say. I do think after the first act or so, Helen of Troy takes a back seat, which is unfortunate. She's the reason for this war, and she's probably in it less than any of the other main characters. The director originally didn't even want to cast anybody as Helen of Troy and just have her be this background figure, which I guess I can see what he was going for there. He figured that no actress could live up to the expectations of the beauty of Helen of Troy, which is kind of a backhanded insult to just about every working actress. But the studio insisted that they cast somebody, and they did a good job with that, but I guess the alternative to, instead of making her this faceless entity, was to just give her no character arc or personality really whatsoever, which is a strange thing to do, especially when this movie takes so many other liberties with the Iliad. But in the final act of this movie, we get what is probably the most iconic sequence across both of these stories, and that's of course the Trojan horse. This is Odysseus's great plan, and it obviously works and leads to the ultimate downfall of the city of Troy. And the sequence is all around pretty tragic. We get the death of Achilles, and while the Achaeans win this battle, they win it in a way that doesn't feel great. I feel like an idiot for never comparing this scene and this siege to Season 8 of Game of Thrones with the episode The Bells. They are very similar. I wonder why that is. Odysseus ends the movie off with another voiceover. Part of me wonders if there was ever a plan to do the Odyssey with Sean Bean. It doesn't seem like it, but for a long time fans had been asking for that sequel or even just a different adaptation, but with Sean Bean as the central character. Ultimately, I feel like this movie and this screenplay were great. Who wrote this movie here? Oh, yes, the two greatest writers of all time. Now, let's get into some differences between the movie Troy and the actual story, the Iliad. These differences are a big reason why this movie is as lowly rated as it is. Now, there are a lot of differences. I am not going to get into every single one of them, but these are some of the highlighted or the more key ones that I feel like either could have been in the movie, made it better, a few that were questionably changed, and I don't really know why they were, because they didn't have to be, and a few changes that I actually think made the movie better. To start off, perhaps the biggest complaint and the biggest piece of this story missing is the involvement of the gods. The Greek gods have a much bigger presence and active involvement in the story of the Iliad. You know how Hector kills Menelaus to save his brother? It's a big emotional moment, big through line for the movie. Yeah, well, that doesn't happen in the Iliad. The goddess Aphrodite swoops down from the heavens and saves Paris before Menelaus can kill him. Because of this, Helen also kinda doesn't like Paris after this because he's such a weenie, which, I mean, fair play on her part. The gods also choose different sides for who they want to win based on their own personal beef with each other. Agamemnon has to sacrifice his daughter to the goddess Artemis to actually be able to set sail to Troy, among a ton of others. While I see the gripe people have with some of this stuff and how it's taking away from a more true adaptation, I do sometimes wonder how they could have even done this. This is a pretty difficult aspect to portray on screen. I have no idea what the scene could have possibly been like if Aphrodite did come down from the heavens and save Paris. Like, even just picturing that in this movie doesn't make any sense. The only way I can really see it is kind of like how they did it in the movie Clash of the Titans. That movie depicted the gods sitting on Mount Olympus, intervening in their own ways in this bright, shiny armor, and people didn't really like that. But I actually think that might be how this movie, or any sort of adaptation of the Iliad, would have gone about doing those scenes. I'm not quite sure what the alternative would have been, and I can see why they made the decision, or the director made the decision, to cut the gods from the movie in an attempt to make the story feel more grounded. There's also some other moments that would have been strange to see on screen. You know how when Achilles goes to fight Hector, well, he doesn't just go out and meet him. Hector runs away, runs around the city of Troy 3 times before Achilles catches up to him, and then he promptly kills him. All I can really think of is this scene.
You! Wait a second! Look, I'm not gonna eat you!
But another huge aspect of the story that's missing is the character of Cassandra, Paris and Hector's sister, who is also a seer. Think Helena from House of the Dragon. Cassandra consistently warns the characters of their actions and of horrible things to come, such as the arrival of Helen, who Cassandra knows to be the person responsible for the downfall of the city. She's also the one who warns of the Trojan horse and that they should get rid of it, not Paris like the movie depicts. But as this movie removed any and all fantastical aspects of the story, Cassandra was also removed. Then there's things that were changed, but for weird, nonsensical reasons. For example, Patroclus being Achilles' cousin and also not a skilled warrior in his own right. In the story of the Iliad, Patroclus is a renowned warrior in his own right. He's Achilles' best friend. Or lover, depending on who you talk to. But I guess in order to clear those rumors, they just made him his cousin instead. But I don't really see why this was a needed change to add the cousin aspect. You can still have the thematic through line about brotherhood in there, even if they aren't actual family. And Patroclus still dies in the same way in the Iliad. It still changes Achilles' character, so why make that change in the first place? Speaking of cousins, Briseis wasn't Hector's cousin in the Iliad either. This whole aspect and storyline might be the biggest offender of cutting the war from 10 years to around 10 days. They didn't travel anywhere to pick up different people, which is what Briseis was in the Iliad, somebody who was taken from another city and given to Achilles. If there's really one glaring issue with this movie, it's this entire plotline. Not that Rose Byrne is bad or anything, it's just entirely underbaked. But maybe the biggest difference, at least in my opinion, has to be the entire third act, which if it had been adapted properly would be far and away darker than the movie already is. In the grand scheme of things, this movie kinda gives us a happy ending. Paris escapes with Helen and gets Briseis away, but that's not at all what happens in the original story. Yes, Paris shoots an arrow at Achilles' heel, but this is all before the Trojan horse actually happens. Paris kills Achilles, Paris is then killed, and then the Trojan horse happens, where there is no escape plan for Hector's wife and son, so his son is taken and thrown off the walls of Troy, and his wife taken captive. Another big deviation is Agamemnon's death, who actually returns home, but is killed by his wife for sacrificing their daughter, which I think would have been a fine addition to the movie, including the sacrifice to the gods much earlier on. You don't even need to have an actual conversation or scene with the gods. There's also the fact that Menelaus doesn't die in the Iliad. Instead, he retakes Helen and they go back and live happily ever after. That doesn't sound good. Sure, maybe it's just because the story is like centuries old, but that just doesn't feel like a satisfying or complete character arc or story arc for anybody involved. Another thing I was kind of surprised about was this movie highlighted, and the Iliad highlights, the rift between Achilles and Agamemnon, but this movie, with as many liberties as it takes, doesn't ever have that kind of climactic final showdown between hero and villain. That arc kind of just goes nowhere. With as Hollywood as this movie was, I definitely expected there to be some sort of final showdown between the two. Granted, I do think that Briseis killing him is probably a good end for her character arc, but I was surprised to see Achilles and Agamemnon not fight whatsoever. There's plenty of other differences between the Iliad and Troy. These are just some of the bigger ones. If you want to hear more about it, I've linked a video in the description below this video right here, so go watch it. It's a great video. So as of the time of recording this, I have not seen the Odyssey. I don't think anybody really in the world has seen the Odyssey yet. All we really have so far are a few trailers, a few confirmed cast and who they're playing. Others are completely unknown or just heavily speculated. So the first question people ask, probably after this movie, I don't know, I've never heard anybody ask this, but will Achilles be in the Odyssey? The answer is yes, but who is going to be playing Achilles is the real question. While there's lots of different speculation of different people playing him, the most recent one I've seen is Elliot Page. I'm gonna personally take a guess at someone else, and that someone else is Brad Pitt. Nolan has been known to keep certain actors secret in his projects. Think Gary Oldman in Oppenheimer, or even Matt Damon in Interstellar. Without going too deep into spoilers for The Odyssey, a story that's, older than all of us combined. I will say that Achilles dies in this movie and in the Iliad, but there will be a brief appearance of Achilles in the Odyssey. Now, Brad Pitt has never worked with Christopher Nolan before. It could be a fun cameo and a cool full circle moment. Since Christopher Nolan almost directed Troy, Brad Pitt almost worked with Christopher Nolan on that movie. I think this could be a cool, like, bridging the gap moment. Part of me wonders what that alternate universe out there looks like, where we got Nolan's version of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Would they be back to back? Would that have been Nolan's great big claim to fame instead of The Dark Knight? But it also seems that the Odyssey will be giving us at least a loose recap of the Iliad. Parts of the trailer certainly take place before the war. He also says in the trailer that the war took 10 years. And of course, there's the inclusion of the Trojan horse scene. While this is the climax of Troy, I'd expect this to be one of the first things we see in the Odyssey, possibly even the opening sequence, or told periodically in flashback form. We know how Nolan loves to use time as a framing device, so I would expect that to be coming. It also seems like there's going to be some scenes and some moments inside the horse, which looks very similar to these moments in Dunkirk. An interesting difference is how each of these horses look. Nolan's looks like an actual giant horse here, while Troy's seems far more realistic and made out of wood, which is funny, because I would have thought Nolan's would be the more realistic looking one. So we'll be seeing some of this stuff, probably not Achilles in flashback form, especially if he will be played by some big name surprise actor. And that brings me to my conversation about realism. Nolan loves him some realism. He made an entire Batman trilogy that was like, what if Batman was actually real? And now they're trying to do that again. His space movie used a black hole that's so accurate that it is now just what science looks for and depicts as black holes. There's even jokes out there that Nolan was gonna use a real atomic bomb, or that he got a real Cyclops for this movie. He definitely prefers realism over everything else, which is why the Odyssey feels like a strange movie for Nolan to do. While the trailers give us some insight, I actually wouldn't be too surprised if Troy and the Odyssey flow together nicely. I think that we might get some glimpses of the gods in the Odyssey, that maybe the story will embrace some of the more fantastical aspects, but I also think those aspects will be toned far down from, say, something like this. So I usually give a real middle ground answer when it comes to these videos, and I'm gonna stop doing that now. I'm gonna go right ahead and say, yes, I do think that you'll probably be able to watch Troy as part 1 and the Odyssey as part 2. While filmmaking techniques have changed over the years, I feel like Nolan's Odyssey will continue to stay as grounded as it possibly can, almost like it would feel like it could take place in the world of Troy, just that these characters never experienced things like Cyclops or Sirens. Do you have to watch Troy first? No, you don't. You can. It'll probably, especially for first-time viewers, it'll probably get you more excited for the Odyssey or to learn more about the history of this story. But do you absolutely have to? No, you don't. I would recommend it, actually. If you're more interested in learning more about this story, you could also read the book, The Iliad and the Odyssey. But it'll be cool to see some of the differences that Troy did versus what the opening of the Odyssey will do, the differences in story and things that were cut. I wonder if the fall of Troy will be as gruesome as depicted in the actual story. It'll be interesting to compare the differences. To be completely honest, I loved this movie. I had super low expectations going into it, but it's definitely added onto my list of rewatchable fantasy films going forward. So that still begs the question, why isn't this movie higher rated? Now, there's few scarier fandoms out there than internet historians. Some of those people you do not want to mess around with. They are responsible for some of the angriest comment sections on the internet. Hopefully this comment section isn't entirely angry, but I'm sure that there will be some angry comments. And while the Iliad and the Odyssey are, at the end of the day, fictional stories, there's complicated questions because apparently the city of Troy did actually exist, depending on who you talk to, so it seems that the Iliad could be inspired by true events. Think like Titanic. That's a movie based on a true story, sure, those events happened, but these characters and these stories, the way that things actually went down, didn't happen. So is this a great adaptation of the Iliad? Maybe not. But is it a good movie? Yes, it is. And I actually think it'll complement the Odyssey very well. But because internet historians and people who like to kind of gatekeep these stories as fact are everywhere on the internet, I actually think the same fate is doomed for the Odyssey. I won't be surprised if the Odyssey gets around the same score as Troy, if people on the internet don't like it very much, but who knows, maybe the Christopher Nolan name will raise it like a whole point score. Personally, I'm gonna give the movie Troy an 8.4 out of 10. What are your thoughts on Troy? What are your thoughts on the Odyssey? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more stuff like this. Special thanks to all my channel members, you guys are the best, and I'll see you all in the next one.